Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
It's the question every couple hears eventually. At a holiday dinner, a family barbecue, or just a casual catch-up with friends. So, when are you two finally having kids? For most people, it's just polite small talk. But for Emma and Mark, it's a dagger. Because behind their polite smiles is a silent grief. Months of negative tests, medical appointments, and a growing sense of isolation. They're trapped in a world that keeps asking a question they simply cannot answer. In this story, we are going to walk alongside Emma and Mark as they navigate one of life's most heartbreaking challenges, learning how to protect their marriage, set boundaries with well-meaning relatives, and redefine what a complete family really looks like. As we listen to their journey, you'll also learn the real, everyday English vocabulary, phrasal verbs, and idioms we use to discuss difficult decisions, handle invasive questions, and express deep, complicated emotions. Let's begin Chapter 1, The Standard Question. The chatter at the backyard barbecue was deafening. Burgers sizzled on the grill, children chased a golden retriever across the lawn, and laughter echoed under the warm afternoon sun. Emma and Mark stood near the patio table, holding iced teas and doing their best to mingle. They were putting on a brave face, but internally they were both exhausted. Suddenly, Aunt Linda approached with a wide, well-meaning smile. She looked at Emma's loose-fitting dress and then beamed at Mark. "So, I have to ask," Linda chimed in, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "When are you two finally starting a family? You've been married for 3 years. Don't keep us waiting forever." The question felt like a sudden physical blow. Mark stiffened beside Emma, his knuckles turning white around his glass. Emma felt a familiar cold wave of panic wash over her. Just that morning, she had stared at another negative pregnancy test in the quiet isolation of their bathroom. Instead of showing her heartbreak, Emma forced a polite smile. It was a practiced, mechanical look she had mastered over the last year. "Oh, you know us, Aunt Linda," Emma said, her voice smooth despite the lump in her throat. "We're just taking things one step at a time and focusing on work right now." "Well, don't wait too long," Linda laughed, patting Mark's shoulder before walking away to greet another relative. Mark caught Emma's eye. Without a single word, they shared a silent grief. They had survived the question this time, but the afternoon had lost its warmth. The morning light struggled to pierce through the heavy blinds of the master bathroom. Emma sat on the edge of the cold porcelain bathtub, her elbows resting on her knees and her face buried in her hands. On the marble counter behind her lay a small plastic stick, completely still, waiting for its time to run out. 2 minutes. To anyone else, it was the time it took to brush their teeth or pour a cup of coffee. To Emma and Mark, it was an eternity where their entire future hung in the balance. Mark stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a coffee mug held tightly in both hands. His eyes were fixed on the digital timer on his phone, watching the seconds tick backward. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of 12 previous months of disappointment. They had done everything right this cycle, tracked the dates, checked the charts, and hoped with everything they had. 30 seconds, Mark whispered softly, his voice tight with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Emma didn't look up. She simply squeezed her eyes shut, praying silently for a second pink line to appear. The phone alarm finally went off, its upbeat electronic beep sounding completely out of place in the quiet room. Mark reached out and turned it off immediately, the sudden silence rushing back into the space. Emma took a deep, shaky breath, stood up, and slowly walked over to the counter to look down at the stick. A single, solitary control line stared back at her. The test was negative. again. Emma felt a familiar emptiness hollow out her chest, a quiet grief that she didn't have the words to describe. Mark set his mug down on the sink, stepped forward and wrapped his arms tightly around her from behind. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair as she let out a long, trembling sigh. Neither of them spoke a word because there was nothing left to say. The tiny plastic window had spoken for them. The refrigerator door in the kitchen was no longer covered in travel magnets or funny photos. Instead, it held a large, laminated calendar, color-coded with fine-tip markers. Red circles marked the critical days, blue lines tracked medication schedules, and black check marks noted doctor appointments. What used to be a spontaneous, loving relationship had slowly transformed into a highly organized, clinical operation. Emma stood in front of the fridge holding a black marker, staring at the upcoming week like a general mapping out a battlefield. She felt a wave of exhaustion just looking at the tight schedule of vitamins, temperature checks, and strictly timed windows. Mark walked into the kitchen, dressed for work, and noticed her staring blankly at the grid of squares. He walked over and gently placed a hand on the small of her back, offering a warm but tired smile. "Are we on track for this week?" he asked, quietly, trying to sound encouraging, but failing to hide the strain in his voice. Emma sighed, capping the marker with a sharp snap that echoed in the quiet kitchen. "Like clockwork," she replied, using a phrase that now felt more like a cage than a comfort. The romance in their marriage had been entirely replaced by a sense of duty, leaving them both feeling completely burnt out. They were no longer connecting as a husband and wife. They were functioning as two business partners managing a failing project. That evening, as they lay in bed, the silence between them felt wider and deeper than the mattress itself. Mark reached across the sheets to take her hand, squeezing it gently in the dark room. "I miss just being us, Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly with vulnerability. Emma turned her head to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears in the dim light. "I miss us too," she whispered back, gripping his hand tightly as they drifted off to sleep under the shadow of the calendar. Emma pushed a silver shopping cart through the crowded aisles of the local grocery store. She was only there to pick up a few basic items, but lately the outside world felt like a minefield. As she turned the corner into the bakery section, she had to stop short to avoid hitting a wide double stroller. A young mother was laughing, handing a piece of cookie to a pair of chubby, smiling toddlers. Emma felt a familiar, sharp pang in her chest, a sudden wave of isolation that threatened to take her breath away. It felt as though a psychological switch had been flipped in her mind, making her notice children and pregnant women absolutely everywhere. Every park bench held a nursing mother, every sidewalk featured a passing stroller, and every billboard seemed to celebrate family life. She hurried through the checkout lane, paid for her items with a tight, forced smile, and practically ran to her car. Sitting in the driver's seat, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, fighting back the tears. Meanwhile, across town at his office, Mark was dealing with his own quiet, invisible battle. During a coffee break in the break room, two of his male co-workers were complaining loudly about their lack of sleep due to their newborns. Mark stood near the espresso machine, nodding politely and offering small, sympathetic chuckles right on cue. Inside, however, he felt entirely detached from his peers, carrying a heavy weight that he couldn't share with anyone. He wanted so badly to be the strong one for Emma, to be the rock she could lean on when she felt like breaking down. But as he stared out the office window at the bustling city below, he felt completely helpless and desperately alone. When they finally met at home that evening, neither of them mentioned the triggers or the pain they had encountered during the day. They simply sat close together on the living room sofa, watching the television screen without really seeing it, holding it together for each other.
Emma sat at the kitchen island, scrolling mindlessly through her phone while waiting for the kettle to boil. The screen filled with the usual mix of vacation photos, recipe videos, and work updates from old college friends. Suddenly, her thumb froze over a new post from Sarah, her closest childhood friend. It was a beautiful, brightly lit photo of Sarah and her husband holding up a black and white sonogram picture. The caption below read, "Our greatest adventure begins this winter. We are completely over the moon." Emma felt the air leave her lungs as if she had just been physically struck in the stomach. A wave of intense, complicated emotions crashed over her all at once, leaving her utterly paralyzed. She felt a deep, genuine love for Sarah, but right alongside it was a sharp, ugly stab of bitter envy. The guilt of her own jealousy hit her immediately, making her feel like a terrible person for not being purely happy. When Mark walked into the kitchen a few moments later, he found her staring blankly at the dark phone screen. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands and immediately walked over, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong, Em?" he asked softly, kneeling down so he could look into her eyes. Without speaking, she turned the screen toward him, showing him the glowing announcement. Mark closed his eyes for a brief second, swallowing hard as he absorbed the news of another friend moving forward without them. "I feel so horrible, Mark," Emma whispered, a single tear finally spilling over her eyelashes and running down her cheek. "You are not a bad person, Emma," he murmured into her hair, holding her close in the quiet kitchen. "It is bittersweet, and it's okay to feel torn. We can be happy for them while still grieving for ourselves."
The waiting room of the fertility clinic was exceptionally quiet, smelling faintly of lavender and sterile linoleum. Emma and Mark sat side by side on a plush leather sofa, their fingers tightly intertwined between them. Every couple in the room kept their eyes glued to their phones or the magazines in their laps, avoiding any eye contact. "Emma and Mark?" a nurse called out softly, holding open a heavy wooden door that led to the back offices. They stood up in unison, adjusting their clothes as if preparing to face a judge, and followed her down the long hallway. Dr. Reynolds, a kind-faced specialist with silver hair, greeted them with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He opened a thick medical file on his desk, clicking his pen as he looked over their latest round of testing. For the next 20 minutes, the room was filled with a dizzying barrage of complex medical jargon and statistics. He spoke of hormone levels, follicle counts, and success percentages, terms that felt completely foreign and overwhelming. "Basically," Dr. Reynolds said, softening his tone, "conceiving naturally is going to be incredibly difficult for you two." He laid out their remaining options on the desk, focusing primarily on a comprehensive, multi-step IVF program. Emma's heart sank as her eyes scanned the informational pamphlet, specifically the section detailing the financial costs. The numbers listed on the page were staggering, amounts that would easily cost them an arm and a leg. They would have to deplete their savings, take out loans, and completely alter their financial future just for a chance at a baby. "We need some time to weigh our options, Doctor," Mark said, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. "Take all the time you need," Dr. Reynolds replied gently. "It is a massive decision, both emotionally and financially." The walk back to the parking lot was completely silent, the afternoon air feeling heavy and thick around them. As Mark unlocked the car, Emma looked over the roof of the vehicle at him, her eyes wide with fear.
They had reached a massive fork in the road, and they had to decide exactly how far they were willing to go.
The bright overhead lights of the restaurant dining room felt blindingly sharp. Emma and Mark were attending a formal work dinner, sitting across from Mark's regional manager and his lively wife, Karen. The evening had been pleasant enough, filled with polite conversation about quarterly goals and corporate changes. But as the dessert plates were cleared away, Karen leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands with a curious expression. "So, Mark tells me you two bought a beautiful house with 4 bedrooms," Karen said, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "What are you doing with all that extra space? When are you going to fill those empty rooms with some babies?" The question was the old song again, but tonight, after the devastating clinic appointment, it felt entirely different. Emma felt a sudden hot wave of adrenaline surge through her veins, replacing her usual polite panic with pure frustration. Mark noticed her breathing change and quickly tried to step in, clearing his throat to deflect the question. "Well, Karen, we actually use one as an office, and—" "Oh, come on," Karen interrupted with a loud laugh. "An office is a waste of a good nursery. You aren't getting any younger, Emma." That was the last straw. The pent-up grief, the financial anxiety, and the months of painful silence finally boiled over. Emma's spoon clattered loudly against her porcelain plate as she dropped it, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "We can't have children, Karen," Emma said, her voice cutting through the restaurant chatter like a razor blade. The table went completely, utterly silent. Karen's smile froze instantly, and her face turned a bright, burning crimson. "We have been trying for over a year, and our bodies are failing us. So please stop asking us about our empty rooms, because every single day they break our hearts." Emma pushed her chair back, stood up with her head held high, and walked swiftly toward the restaurant exit. Mark didn't hesitate for a single second. He threw down a handful of cash, apologized briefly to his stunned manager, and ran out into the cool night air after his wife. The drive home from the restaurant had been completely silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating weight of a secret. It was the quiet after a massive clearing storm. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table, a warm mug of tea cradled in her hands, looking out at the backyard. Mark walked in, sliding into the chair right across from her, his expression deeply proud but concerned. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, reaching across the wooden table to touch her arm. Emma took a deep breath, looking down at her tea before meeting his eyes. "Honestly, I feel lighter," she said, a small, genuine smile touching the corners of her lips for the first time in months. "I am so tired of hiding our pain just to make other people feel comfortable with their casual questions." Mark nodded firmly, squeezing her hand. "Me too, Em. We can't control what people ask, but we can control how much we let them in." Together, they realized that the silence was eating them alive, and they needed to find a new way to communicate with the world. They spent the rest of the morning practicing how to set firm, healthy boundaries with their well-meaning but invasive loved ones. They crafted direct, polite phrases to use the next time someone stepped over the line or asked about their timeline. "We are navigating some private health challenges right now, and we appreciate your support and space," Emma practiced saying aloud. It felt strange at first, but with every repetition, the words felt less like a confession of failure and more like a shield. They were finally learning how to say, "This is our boundary. It is hard, and we need you to respect it." By choosing vulnerability on their own terms, they were taking back the power that the fertility journey had stolen from them. The laminated, color-coded calendar that had ruled their kitchen for over a year was finally gone from the refrigerator door. In its place was a simply printed hotel reservation for a small, quiet cabin tucked deep into the mountains. Realizing they were on the brink of complete emotional burnout, Emma and Mark had made a conscious decision to pause. They called the fertility clinic, put the expensive medical treatments on hold, and packed 2 small suitcases into the trunk. As Mark drove down the winding mountain highway, the heavy fog of the city seemed to clear away behind him. Emma rolled down her passenger window, letting the cool, pine-scented air rush over her face and lift her hair. For the first time in 12 months, they weren't traveling to a sterile waiting room or counting down the hours to a medication window. They arrived at the cabin just as the sun was beginning to dip below the jagged peak of the mountains. That evening, they built a roaring fire in the stone fireplace and sat together on a thick wool blanket on the floor. They opened a bottle of wine, ordered a greasy pizza from the local diner, and began to talk about anything and everything. They laughed about old college memories, discussed books they wanted to read, and shared their dreams for future travel. It was a beautiful, necessary reconnection, a reminder of the foundation they had built before the words fertility journey existed. "I forgot how funny you are," Emma murmured, resting her head gently against Mark's sturdy shoulder. Mark smiled, wrapping his arms securely around her and kissing the top of her head in the warm glow of the fire. "I never forgot," he replied softly. "I just think we got lost in the storm for a little while." They were turning a new leaf, consciously choosing to protect their bond regardless of what their future family looked like. They hadn't solved their problem, but as they fell asleep to the sound of crackling wood, they knew they had saved themselves. A light breeze rustled the green leaves of the oak trees in the park, casting moving shadows across the crowded picnic tables. Emma and Mark walked hand in hand toward the annual family reunion, the familiar sounds of chatter and laughter growing louder as they approached. A year ago, an event like this would have filled them with a deep, paralyzing dread, causing them to rehearse their excuses in the car. Today, however, Emma felt a profound sense of calm washing over her, her posture relaxed, and her chin held high. They had not received a miraculous positive test, nor had they magically raised the thousands of dollars needed for clinic treatments. Instead, they had won a much bigger, more meaningful victory. They had found peace exactly where they were. As they approached the main pavilion, Aunt Linda spotted them immediately, dropping her spatula and waving them over with an enthusiastic grin. "There they are," Linda cried out, hugging them both tightly, before looking Emma up and down with an inquisitive glint in her eye. "So, I saw you two took a little mountain vacation recently. Are there any special announcements you want to share with the family yet?" Mark didn't stiffen this time, and Emma didn't feel that cold, familiar wave of panic crash over her. She simply looked at her aunt, offering a warm, direct, and completely unapologetic smile that showed no trace of heartbreak. "No announcements, Aunt Linda," Emma said, her voice clear, steady, and light. "We are just really happy focusing on each other right now." Linda blinked, surprised by the absolute certainty in Emma's voice, before nodding quickly. "Well, that's wonderful, dear." Mark caught Emma's eye, a proud, knowing smile passing between them as they moved toward the food table to fill their plates.
They hadn't given up on their dream of having a family, but they had stopped letting the lack of a child define the worth of their marriage. They were holding on to their hope lightly now, refusing to let it weigh them down or steal the joy from the life they already shared. Hand in hand, they stepped forward into the warmth of the afternoon sun, completely ready to face whatever their future held together.
Emma and Mark's story doesn't end with a miracle, but it ends with something much more powerful, a strong boundary, a unified marriage, and genuine peace. Infertility is a silent grief that millions of couples face, and learning to navigate those painful social moments is a true victory. Today, we walked through some heavy emotional territory, but we also learned some incredibly valuable English. We looked at how to express burnout, how to handle difficult small talk, and the specific idioms native speakers use when making major life decisions. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. If Emma and Mark's journey resonated with you, or if it helped you learn something new today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Before you go, I have a question for you to practice your English in the comments below. How do you politely handle invasive or uncomfortable questions in your own culture? Let's share our experiences and learn from each other. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.